What we do matters. What we do affects the outcome. So either way, MIT, you've got to go out and do really interesting things, important things, inventive things, because this world, real or imagined, this world has some problems that we need you to drop everything and solve. So go ahead, take your pick from the world's worst buffet. Economic inequality, that's a problem. How about the refugee crisis? Massive global insecurity, climate change, pandemics, institutional racism, a pull to nativism, fear-driven brains working overtime. Here in America and in places like Austria, where a far-right candidate nearly won the presidential election for the first time since World War II. Or the Brexit, for God's sakes, that insane idea that the best path for Britain is to cut loose from Europe and drift out to sea. I mean, what is Europe even going to look like in 25 years? And add to that an American political system that's failing. We've got congressmen on a 2-year election cycle who are incentivized to think short-term and simply do not engage with long-term problems. And add to that a media that thrives on scandal and people with their pants down, anything to get you to tune in so they can hawk you products that you don't need. And add to that a banking system that steals people's money. It's all right, I'm not running for office. By the way, while I'm on this, let me just say this to the bankers, specifically the ones who brought you the biggest heist in history. It was theft, and you knew it. It was fraud, and you knew it. And you know what else? We know that you knew it. So yeah, you sort of got away with it. You got that house in the Hamptons that other people paid for as their own mortgages went underwater. And you might have their money, but you don't have our respect. And just so you know, when we pass you on the street and look you in the eye, that's what we're thinking. All right, so before my little banking digression, I rattled off a bunch of big problems. And a natural response is to tune out and turn away. But before you step out into our big troubled world, I want to pass along a piece of advice that Bill Clinton offered me a little over a decade ago. Actually, when he said it, it felt less like advice and more like a direct order. What he said was, turn toward the problems you see. You have to engage and turn towards the problems that you see. Except it sounded like, turn towards the problems that you see. But when he said this to me, he literally turned his body for emphasis towards me. No, listen, it seemed kind of simple at the time, but the older I get, the more wisdom I see in this. That is what I want to urge you to do today, to turn towards the problems that you see and engage with them. Walk right up to them, look them in the eye, and then look yourself in the eye and decide what you're going to do about them. Now, in my experience, there is just no substitute for actually going and seeing these things. I owe this insight, like many others, to my mom. When I was a teenager, Mom thought it was important for us to see the world outside of Boston. And I don't just mean Framingham. She took us to places like Guatemala, where we saw extreme poverty up close, and it changed my whole frame of reference. And I think it was that same impulse that took my brother and me to Zambia in 2006 as part of the One campaign, the organization that Bono founded to fight desperate and what he calls stupid poverty and preventable disease in the developing world. And on that trip, in a small community, I met this girl, and I walked with her to a nearby bore well where she could get clean water. She'd just come home from school, and I knew the reason that she was able to go to school at all was clean water. Namely, the fact that it was available nearby, so she didn't have to walk miles back and forth all day to get water for her family like so many girls and women do around the world. So I asked her if she wanted to stay in her village when she grew up, and she smiled and said, no, I want to go to Lusaka and become a nurse. So clean water, something as basic as that, had given this child a chance to dream. And as I learned more about water and sanitation, I was floored by the extent to which it undergirds all these problems of extreme poverty. The fate of entire communities, economies, countries is caught up in that glass of water, something the rest of us get to take for granted. People at One told me that water is the least sexy and cool aspect of the effort to fight extreme poverty. And water goes hand in hand with sanitation, so if you think water isn't sexy, you should try to get into the shit business. But I was hooked already. The enormity of it, the complexity of the issue, it just hooked me. And getting out in the world and meeting people like this little girl is what put me on the path to starting Water.org with a brilliant civil engineer named Gary White. And for Gary and me, seeing the world and its problems, its possibilities, heightened our disbelief that so many people, millions, 660 million in fact, can't get a safe, clean drink of water or a clean private place to go to the bathroom. There are more people with a cell phone than access to a toilet on our planet. And this heightened our determination to do something about it. Now, you see some tough things out there, but you also see life-changing joy, and it all changes you. There was a refugee crisis back in '09 that I read about in this amazing article in the New York Times. People were streaming across the border of Zimbabwe to a little town in northern South Africa called Messina. Well, I was working in South Africa at the time, so I went up to Messina to see for myself what was going on. I spent a day speaking with women who had made this perilous journey across the Limpopo River, dodging bandits on one side, crocodiles in the river, bandits on the other. Every woman that I spoke to that day had been raped. Every single one, on one side of the river or both. And at the end of my time there, I met a woman who was so positive, she was so joyful. She had just been given her papers, so she'd been granted political asylum in South Africa. And in the midst of this joyful conversation, I mustered up my courage and I said, "Ma'am, do you mind my asking, were you assaulted on your journey to South Africa?" And she replied, still smiling, "Oh yes, I was raped, but I have my papers now, and those bastards didn't get my dignity." Human beings will take your breath away. They will teach you so much, but you have to engage. I only had that experience because I went there myself. It was difficult in many ways, but of course that's the point. There is a lot of trouble out there, MIT, but there's a lot of beauty too, and I hope you see both. But again, the point is not to become some kind of well-rounded, high-minded voyeur. The point is to eliminate your blind spots, the things that keep us from grasping the bigger picture. But looking at the world as it is and engaging with it is the first step towards identifying our blind spots. And that's when we can really start to understand ourselves better and begin to solve some problems. And with that as your goal, there's a few more things I hope you'll keep in mind. First, you're going to fail sometimes, and that's a good thing. For all the amazing successes I've been lucky to share, and few things have shaped me more than the auditions that Ben and I used to go on as young actors, where we'd get on a bus, we'd show up in New York, we'd wait our turn, we'd cry our hearts out for a scene, and then be told, "Okay, thanks," meaning game over. We used to call it being okay, thanks. And those experiences became our armor. But don't believe the hype that's thrown at you. You don't have all the answers, and you shouldn't, and that's fine. You're going to have your share of bad ideas. But as the great philosopher Benjamin Affleck once said, "Judge me by how good my good ideas are, not how bad my bad ideas are." You've got to suit up in your armor. You've got to get ready to sound like a total fool. Not having an answer isn't embarrassing. It's an opportunity. Don't be afraid to ask questions. I know so much less the second time I'm fake graduating than the first time.
I just said to Matt, losing would suck and winning would be really scary.
The second thing I want to leave you with is you got to
scary.
keep listening. The world wants to hear your ideas, good and bad, but today is not the day you switch from receive to transmit. Once you do that, your education is over, and your education should never be over. Even outside of your work, there are always ways to keep challenging yourself. But whatever you do, just keep listening, even to people you don't agree with at all. I love what President Obama said at Howard University's commencement last month. He said, "Democracy requires compromise even when you are 100% right." So let me ask you this in closing. What are you going to be a part of? What is the problem that you will try to solve? Whatever your answer, it is not going to be easy. Sometimes your work will hit a dead end. Sometimes your work will be measured in half steps. Sometimes your work will make you wear a white sequined military uniform and make love to Michael Douglas. All right, maybe that's just my work. But for all of you here, your work starts today. And seriously, how lucky are you? I mean, what are the odds that you're the ones who are here today? In the Earth's 4.5 billion year run, with 100 billion people who have lived and died, and the 7 billion of us here now, here you are. There are potentially trillions of human beings who will someday exist or not, whose fate in large part depends on the choices you make, on your ideas, on your grit and persistence and willingness to engage. There is more at stake today than in any story ever told. And how lucky you are that you're here and you're you. And how lucky we are that you're here and you're you. So I hope you'll turn toward the problem of your choosing. I hope you'll turn toward the problem of your choosing. I hope you'll drop everything, and I hope you'll solve it. This is your life, class of 2016. This is your moment, and it is all down to you. Ready, player one? Your game begins now. Thank you. Congratulations.